Okay, so this week I'm not going to do a pattern. I'm going to talk because we had some requests from club members about some basic stuff. We haven't done this for a while, so I'm going to just do initially I'll start with a review of tools and equipment for fly tying for those who are looking for some aids in tying and who maybe just want to know what sort of stuff's available. I have quite a raft of stuff here that I keep handy when I sit down to tie in the living room because my outside doghouse has poor internet access, so I can't do that there. So the first thing we'll talk about is vices, and there are a plethora of vices available for fly tying. This one is a Dynaking. You don't have to spend that kind of money. You can buy on a relatively inexpensive vise, and that's like an entire topic on its own. So other than having something that will hold a hook securely, we'll leave vices alone for the time being. The next thing you're going to need, which is probably one of the key parts of fly tying, is scissors. And I have a whole range of scissors, but the important thing you need with fly tying scissors, you can't use embroidery ones because they don't have a big enough loops for your fingers to control them properly. Also, they typically don't have a fine enough tip. And if you get fly tying or scissors that are specifically for fly tying, they have a micro grooves on the edge of one of the blades that has a little bit of serrations in it. And that helps holding materials in place so they doesn't slide down the scissors when you're trying to cut stuff. So you're better off buying actual proper fly tying scissors. These are straight blade ones with a bit of a bent handle, so you can hold them in your hand like that and the point's out of the way. I also have a pair of ones that are similar that have a curved tip that allows you to get in a little tighter. These ones are really fine point. So having a range of scissors for different tasks is probably not a bad idea. And they will range $30 to $40 and up. You can get cheaper embroidery scissors, but again, a lot of those don't have the micro serrated edge. And you want scissors that have very, very fine points. There's a lot of times when you just need to get in there and clip one little piece of hair or something. The next important thing to have is bobbins to carry your thread, your tying thread. If you go back to original bobbins, this is an original style of bobbin in that it's got springy arms that have a thing that goes into the hole on the bobbin that allows it to be centered and spin around the axis. And this one is an early one. It has as the tube for the thread, it's just a metal tube that has a flare on the end. The problem with those, and they're inexpensive. The problem with those inexpensive ones is over time, this tip will wear and it'll get ragged spots on it and it will break your thread when you least expect it.
There's a solution for that.
Yeah. One of the solutions for that is this thing here, which is a composite bobbin, and it has a little ceramic tube that's a little harder than the steel. And then the other ones, some of them have a little agate insert to that will stop it. This is a mini bobbin that takes these little things are like literally the bobbins on a sewing machine. So if your wife has a sewing machine and you want to have a small handy thing like this, you can actually thread these things with tying thread, and then you can use them for tying. It's nice and compact. The ones that I have, and Florin has some that are even fancier, but these ones I discovered at a fly fishing show in Calgary. It's called a Rite, R-I-T-E bobbin. And it has a tension control on the side. And it has a hardened steel so that you don't develop that. And there's actually ones that have the ceramic tip as well. They come in a couple of different configurations. The beauty of these is you can really carefully adjust the tension on the thread so that there's no danger if you yarf on it of actually breaking the thread, but that it doesn't take a lot of tension in order to wrap. And I've got a series of these that, in different sizes and shapes. So that's bobbins. The other thing, and scissors, those are two. Another few things that would come really handy is just a pair of pliers for flattening the barbs on hooks. But you best get the ones like these that are electronics pliers. They have no serrations on the jaws so that it won't damage the hook. So they're flat jaw pliers. You can get those at any store that sells electronic stuff. Another thing you're going to need is a bobbin threader, and that's to get the thread into your bobbin. And that's just a little piece of wire that you shove down the tube of the bobbin, fit the thread in it, pull it out. That's the expensive version. It has a little brass handle. The cheap version of those is you buy these for next to nothing at the drugstore. And what these are is a dental floss threader. So you can buy, for $5, you can buy a whole whack of them. And then you don't need to have one of those fancy metal ones. So that's getting thread in the bobbin through the tube and ready to tie it down. Another thing you're going to want is something that's fairly straightforward, and this is called a bodkin, which is basically a needle with a handle. You can make your own with a piece of doweling and gluing it, drilling a hole in the end of a piece of dowel and sticking a needle in. These brass ones are kind of nice because they balance nicely in your hand. And you need that for a variety of little things, not the least of which is putting a little dop of glue on the end of the fly when you're finished. Another handy tool you'll probably find in your medicine cabinet is a pair of tweezers. Quite often you're going to find yourself having to pluck bits of hair or stuff off and do little things with a pair of tweezers that are easier to get into a small fly than get your fingers in there. And they're relatively inexpensive. Another tool that's really handy is what's called a half hitch tool. And that is just you wrap the thread around the half hitch tool, stick it over the other hook, and then slide the half hitch off. You can use your finger, but this makes placing the hitch a little nicer. You can go buy one of these brass jobbies for a little bit of money, or you can use the tip of a ballpoint pen.
That's what I use.
And it works just as well as the others. Another key tool that I have handy is a hook sharpener, and it's got a flat edge. Sometimes when you bend down the barb on a hook, it breaks rather than bending. And so this is really nice to be able to flatten off that little bit of stuff that sticks out. Whip finishers. There's this is for tying the continuous half hitch to finish off the fly. There's a couple of different varieties. This one I particularly like. It will spin very nicely when you hook it on and do the final continuous half hitch, the whip finish. There's a couple other versions on the market. The other thing you will need is hackle pliers, and this is for holding on to small materials initially, that hackles to wrap around the hook and hold things in place. And the beauty of hackle pliers is that they will spin around without twisting the hackle when you're wrapping that hackle around the hook. Now these things, they sometimes come with little little rubber tips on there so the hackle doesn't slide out of the pliers. And so what I have here is a piece of heat shrink tubing that has been put on there so that it grips the hackle a little bit better. That's a hackle plier. The other hackle pliers are these guys. These are the old English style, and they're sprung so you can squeeze the hackle plier to grab the hackle. And again, with this one, I have put some heat shrink tubing on it so it grips the hackle very well. So those are hackle pliers. Let's see, what else have I got here? Dubbing twisters. There's a variety of these things on the market. And this is for doing a dubbing loop where you take a piece of thread off of the shank of the hook and then take it back up and wrap it and you make a loop. And you put material in here that you're going to then twist the folded thread to create a means of holding onto the material that you're then going to wrap on the hook. And this is the cheapy version. It works quite well. It's pretty straightforward. You just take a thread from the shank of the hook and you put it in the loop on one side, then around this little pokey bit out here, around the other side, take it back up and wrap it on, and you end up with this loop that you can then spin like that to trap the material. Then you can get the fancy one, which is this guy here that has a little hook arrangement where you can bring the thread in and make your loop this way, shove the material in, and then you can hold on to it and you can spin it like this to tighten the loop. So that's that guy. And then there's two of these. I have two of this version that have this one has a handle, and you hook the material from this one to this one and back to the hook. And then you just take your thumb and you spin the daylights out of it. That's that one. And I have an equivalent one, which is this, which it uses the weight. You put the loop through these two things, and then you spin it, hang it below the fly, and then just give it a spin. And this one I probably use more than the others if I'm doing a dubbing loop. Then a couple of other oddball tools. You'll want something to roughen up the dubbing. When you get it on the body, you're going to want something. And this is a commercial grade one that's a fancy little brass handle, but it's got a piece of Velcro on the end. So rather than doing that, you can do the do-it-yourself type dubbing brush, which is basically a popsicle stick with a piece of Velcro on it. And that's a whole bunch cheaper than trying to buy the commercial one. There's a couple of other interesting tools you might want to get your hands on if you're going to tie with deer hair. And that's two tools that work for tying and spinning deer hair. The first is a hair stacker. It's a two-part device. It has a barrel and then a base. And you shove your deer hair in the end here and then whack it down really well. And it evens up the tips so that when you take the top of the thing from the bottom, if you hold it at a slight angle like that, the tips will stick out here and the tips will be nice and even. And that's great for making flies that have even bodies, or they have wings that go out. And I have those in a couple of different sizes. And this is a favorite of mine. This used to be owned by a really good fly tyer and fly fisherman in Edmonton called Roman Sherabin, and I picked it up from his estate sale. Keep it handy to remember, Roman. And the other thing that you might want is one of these guys, which I bought commercially, but you could probably make one. And this is Packer. And what it is it's got a handle with a little disc on it with some different sized holes punched in it. And what that allows you to do is to fit that hole over the eye of the hook and push back on your stacked deer hair. And one of these days we'll do a stacked deer hair pattern to show you why you need to do that. And the primary reason is if you try to do that with your fingers and your fingers slip, you will impale yourself on the hook. And this thing prevents that.
Yeah, getting the hook right up your thumbnail or
Oh yeah, right under
pointer finger is a real thrill and a half.
And I got another cute little one here. This is a you know, like Velcro on a stick. This is a dubbing rake. It's got little tines on the end that allows you to rough up the dubbing. So I've acquired all of these things over a very long period of time. Another couple of tools that you probably want is a pair of forceps. Sometimes there's things you need to grab onto with a pair of forceps. Let's see, what else have I got here? I think that's pretty much it, other than a couple of other materials that are fundamental to the fly tying business. One is this stuff here. This is a clear nail polish. We buy this stuff it's Sally Hansen's Extreme Wear, or used to be known as Hard as Nails. And it's basically an clear acrylic nail polish. And that's for cementing things onto the hook and to finish the fly off. The other thing you're going to need is at some point some super glue. This stuff here you can get it's called JB Super Weld. And the nice thing about this is that it is cheap. You can buy it at home hardware for not a lot of money. This one is being cornered today. And it's got a little brush, which allows you to put the super glue onto your fly exactly where you need it to hold stuff together without spilling it all over your hands and gluing your fingers together.
And if the cap is sticking, take some either dubbing wax or beeswax and rub it around the
top of the cap. Yeah.
Yep.
And another thing is this stuff, which I don't use very often, but if I'm doing a lot of dub bodies, it's dubbing wax. And that stuff is basically, it's a sticky wax, beeswax in a lot of cases. And it just wrap it on the thread. And then when you put your dubbing on, it helps the dubbing adhere to the thread. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is a couple of materials. Back here. So this stuff comes as a kit. And what it is it's a UV set glue. So this is a Loon product. You can buy different company. And this comes in a couple of different thicknesses, a thin and a thick. And in addition to the glue that you put on the fly, you need, because it's set with ultraviolet light, you need a little ultraviolet flashlight that will set that glue. And that's really useful for a variety of purposes. You can make bodies out of the UV glue. You can use it to make some nice shiny coating on backs of nymphs and stuff like that. And one other thing here is if you're tying with deer hair, you're going to need a fine-tooth comb. When you stack your deer hair, you're going to want to be able to go like this to take all the fuzz out of the bottom before you stack it so that it stacks up nice. I have a few other tools that I'm not going to show you today because they're stuck away in my tying desk that were made by a Swiss fellow for dealing with CDC, Col de Canard. Mark Petitjean out of Switzerland also makes, in addition to some tools to handle CDC, he makes this really nice kit that has a really fine material. It's got your dubbing needle, your twister, your whip finisher, some clips, spinner, and some really nice scissors. Those kits are pretty pricey now. I bought them when it was still not too bad. But there are some really high-end stuff if you really want to spend money on your stuff. Most of the time I try to make do with what I've got handy. And I think that is pretty much it for the discussion on basic tools and stuff. So I thought I'd start there. And we still have a few minutes left before we get to go anywhere. Lauren has something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hook in the vise, and I'm going to deal with a couple of questions that arose on Tuesday involving very basic techniques. And one of them is, how do you get the thread to start on the hook and go where you want? So I'm using black thread. Maybe I'll use red thread so that it's a little easier to see. No, it's usually black. It's thicker. Easier to see on the video. So what I do is I take my bobbin and I hold it in my, if you're right-handed, your right hand, and I hold it in my hand in such a way that I'm cupping the spool in the palm of my hand like that. And what if you don't have these tension controlled style of bobbins, that allows you to use the pressure of the palm of your hand to control the tension in the thread. So you hold it in your hand like that, and you hold it by the tube, and that allows you to squeeze your hand to tighten the tension or loosen it up. Then to attach it to the hook, you take the thread at about a 30 to 45 degree angle on the near side of the hook, holding it at the bottom, and then you make at least one wrap completely around the hook like that. And you'll notice the angles. See that the bobbin tip is to my right, to the eye of the fly. If you're left-handed, it would be the reverse. You'd be tying left-handed. And the point of that is from where the thread touches the hook to where the tip of the bobbin is, if you keep the tip of the bobbin on the eye end of the hook, as you wrap around the hook, that will make the thread walk up the shank of the hook towards the eye. If you want the thread to go to the back, you push the tip of the bobbin towards the rear of the hook from where the eye is, and you will see it will walk down the shank. And what that does is that allows you control, depending on how far back or forward it goes, it allows you to control precisely where that thread wraps onto the hook. You can wrap it this way in touching turns, or you can open spiral it down, depending on where you want the thread to go and how wide spaced you want those things to be done. Another trick that you learn really early on is when you're cutting off things, you always take your scissors down from the top, on top of the hook, and snip the thread off. If you try to do it elsewhere, there's a good chance you're going to snip this part and the bobbin will end up on the floor. So that's the basic attachment of thread to the hook and how you control where the thread is on the hook shank. So now one of the things we do on a lot of fly patterns is we do what we call dress the hook, which is put some wraps of thread down the hook shank. And one of the purposes of that is to keep materials that are a little bit slippery from spinning around the hook shank when you're tying them on. So the first thing one of the things that really prompted me to talk about this was the fellow said, well, how do I keep, when I'm attaching stuff to the hook, from wrapping around the hook shank? So I'm really quickly going to simulate tying a marabou. A woolly bugger. So this is marabou. It is, if you just put it on the hook and tried to wrap it around, the whole stuff would spin around the shank like that, and it would look pretty awful. If you want to tie a nice tail on a marabou fly, or a bucktail fly, or anything like that, where you want a nice tight tail, you want the material to sit on top of the hook and not to spin around the hook. So he says, well, how do I do that? So I pinch it down to a size that I can manage in a pair of, in just my left hand or my non-thread hand. And I will set that down right on top of the hook and pinch it. And there's this little V in your fingers here. I will put that down right where the thread is. Bingo, right there, on top of the hook. I will bring the thread up in between my fingers, push back between them so I'm holding thread and material with my fingers. Bring the thread down the far side of the hook and don't pull yet. Then I will bring it up and put it between my fingers again and squeeze it a little bit. And then when I pull, I'm going to pull straight up. And I'll make that loose wrap down the far side and bring it around and bring it straight up again. And then I can let the thread hang. And you'll see what's happened is that material is sitting right smack on top of the hook. And it's that pinch and pull up that keeps the material on top of the hook. And if I wanted to keep doing that down the fly, I would simply do this with my fingers a little bit around and pull up, a little bit around and pull up, and just work my way up the shank of the fly till I get to the front. And you'll see that that material is now sitting on top of the hook, not around the hook. To tie it off, I'll come in front and pull back and wrap backwards just enough to trap the end of that material. Come in on top again, going to come down on top with my scissors and trim right there. And lo and behold, my bobbin did not fall on the floor. So I would come back and just wrap back on that. And I've done that just to keep a relatively even body. And the next question he had was, well, how do I keep this stuff from wrapping around the hook bend? And so I said, well, what you do is you hold with your hand, non-thread hand, you hold the material up like that. You make one wrap behind, then you swap hands, bring the thread in front and wrap in front. And then do that again, bring it in behind, pull forward a little bit, and then wrap in front. And what that does is that keeps the tail material from going down the bend of the hook and subsequently wrapping around the hook and getting in the way of the fish being caught. The next bit here was, again, how do I attach chenille or anything else like that to the hook? I try not to do it with bulk. So one of the things I do with this chenille, and various kinds of chenille come differently, but chenille is basically something that's trapped between strands of thread. And the way to attach that without creating a great big whacking bump where you attach it is to pull the ends off so that that central thread of the chenille is exposed. I'm going to do that. This chenille isn't the best for that. This is a little more tight. So then I will lay that little piece of thread there and make that loose loop over top and pull around and up. And that will attach, oops, pull it up too soon. This is very fuzzy chenille, very fuzzy chenille. It's not got a lot of thread. There we go. Oh, before I start this, one of the things that happens when you wrap around the hook, if you're like me and you're right-handed, you're wrapping up and down the hook, the thread will spin, it will twist in a clockwise fashion as you wrap it around the hook shank. If you do that and you don't make a correction, what happens is when you make an open soft loop to attach a piece, you'll notice that that loop, the loop that you make, tends to fall towards the eye of the hook. And that's because, and that's what's called a soft loop. You make a soft loop that you're going to attach a piece of material with. If that falls to the front of the hook, it's hard to get it to attach to that material you're holding in between your fingers. The way to stop that is to let your bobbin hang and spin it. You can't really see it. You can spin it counterclockwise. And then when you make your soft loop, that loop will fall towards the rear of the hook, which makes it a lot easier to capture that fine piece of material you're trying to attach to the hook. So we'll do that. We'll spin it counterclockwise, and then we'll get that little bit of material there, make a soft loop, and see it goes right to the back. And I can trap that, just that little strand that's in the middle of the chenille. Get that out of the way. Having a material clip on your vise is really nice because it keeps loose material out of the way. So that's another thing you can look for. Is a tool is one of these spring clips, or there's some that's just clips on the vise and has a little, it's a little metal thing you can stick thread and stuff into. So once again, to attach, what I'm going to attach with this is the ribbing material. And so this is again the same routine. If I do a quick counterclockwise spin of the hook bobbin, I can make a soft loop around, and not before I tighten it, I'll pull back so I don't have to get my scissors in there. I can pull it towards the back. Don't have to get my scissors in there to trim off the waist. So then I can let that out of the way. And Florin can talk to you at some other time about making these little devices that hold that material quite nicely out of the way. So now I can do this on make my body. And this particular chenille is a flat chenille. It's a medium black, it says, but it's flat. To make it fuzzy, I have to take it like that and spin the daylights out of it with my fingers. And then when I can start wrapping it around the hook shank, it is fuzzy and not flat, and it tends to stick out better. So again, if you have these flat materials, the trick here is to twist them or spin them before you wrap them on the hook shank. And then they will tend to unspin as you make those clockwise wraps up the hook. So you need to make a counterclockwise wrap as you're going up the hook with your fingers. So we'll just do that. And then we wrap over top. And I always wrap it in by putting the thread in between the V that's created between the shank and the holding material over the top. And then when I've finished that, I will pull the material back and make 2 or 3 wraps in front. And that will trap that material so it won't come spiraling undone. Now, what I didn't do on this, which I should have done, I was not thinking ahead, is I didn't put my hackle in at the back. This is a basic woolly bugger. So I didn't put my hackle in. So I'm going to get a hackle. And whip it out of the bag. And for woolly buggers, you want a fairly soft, broad hackle that's going to create some disturbance in the water. So I have a neck that's got an abundance of those. And to attach this, again, one of the basic things is you want to size the hackle for the fly that you're tying. And you can measure it by stripping carefully from the tip of the hackle towards the butt of the hackle. It will cause the barbules to stick out to the side. And then you can measure them against the gap of the hook to make them the right length. And for a woolly bugger, you want a fairly broad hackle. For dry flies, you want them to be a little smaller. That was not intended. That got away from me. There we go, back in the material clip. So in this case, I want, because you'll see that the hackle is tapered, I want the wider part of the hackle at the front of the fly to create an inversed comb So that in order to do that, I want to tie the hackle in by that tip. And so I'll hold it in my left hand, and this is basic for a lot of material. I'll hold it right where the thread is and create a little spot there where the hackle is, the stem of the hackle is exposed. Pinch wrap up in between the fingers, down the foreside, and pull. I don't have to pull up on this one, but down like that. And do a 2 at least, and then wrap over top in front, and that will trap the tip of that hackle that I'm going to cut off, and it won't pull out. So the wrap in behind, wrap in front. And then I'm going to bring my thread back to the front, open spiral, and I'll wrap my rib. And again, this is just left hand to right hand over the hook and underneath. And again, if you're looking at the angle that the material makes with the straight body of the hook, if I keep that at a 45-degree angle as I wrap over top and underneath, I will get nice even wraps up the body of the fly, trying to keep that angle the same. And the steepness of the angle will determine if it's really right angles, the wraps will be close together. If it's at an angle like that, it'll walk up the fly with a broader spacing. And then again, over top a couple of times in that V between the material and the hook shank. Pull the material back and a couple of wraps in front. And then that's trapped so it won't pull out. And then at this point, I'm going to throw a half hitch, and I have a tool for that, but you could use your finger. I'm going to throw a half hitch just so that nothing unravels on me while I bring, and that's a good thing to remember if you're tying a fly that has multiple steps, is throwing a half hitch every once in a while will keep stuff from raveling on you when you're doing the next step. So with this guy, I can use my hands rather than grabbing it with a hackle plier. And I'm going to wrap forward over top, trying to put those wraps in between the ribbing, just for the heck of it. And you can see it's because this is a very soft, webby hackle, it's tending to flatten out on me. So I'm going to try to keep it sticking out to straight to the sides. And sometimes you have to twist the hackle to do that a little bit as you wrap. This is pretty soft hackle. And then when we get up to the front, as you see, we're getting an inverted shape where it's narrower at the back than it is at the front. Very soft stem on this hackle. When I get to the front, I'll just do 2 or 3 close wraps together. I'll hold the material up, make a little V with my 3 fingers, first 2 fingers, and I'll slide it back like that to expose the quill of that hackle fiber. And then I'll put it on top. And then I'll pull the material back and make a couple of wraps in front. And trim it off. Now, in order to create a space for doing a head, I'll again take this little 3 fingers and pull that material back out of the way so I can wrap up right behind the eye of the hook. And then the whip finisher. One of the ways you could do that, rather than whip finish, you could do multiple half hitches over the eye of the hook. And that will finish the fly off. Or you can use a tool for a whip finisher. This funny little guy, this is a Mattarelli style whip finisher. There's another style which I don't happen to have here right now. And the way you work that is you put this wiggly portion where this little piece here will rest on the thread, on top of the thread. You put the thread in the hook, you lay it down across the other thread like that, and across the eye of the hook. And then you let go of the tool itself and you hang on to the tube and you just go around. Push away and pull back. And that we can, another day we can talk about using whip finishes, or in my case, I can do that with my hand. And we'll do that another day. We'll talk about the whip finishing tools and ways of finishing off the fly. So that's the first go at basic tools and techniques. And we'll call that a day for that part today. And I will go back here and I will remove the spotlight. And you guys can go back to making criticism of how badly I did that. Anyway, that gives you it for anybody who's new to fly tying. That gives you a few ideas of materials and equipment. Equipment and tying tools and some basic material.
No, that was good. Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
When I first started fly tying, I made a lot of my own little tools and that, and I'm still using those. So
yeah,
they work.
Yeah, you don't have to spend tons of money on them.
No, you don't. It's nice having fancy stuff, but it's not necessary.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so Florin, you're up, and that's within the hour. So you should be able to go.
Dave, so here's the pattern. I send a PDF on chat now, so you should be receiving it shortly if you haven't received it already. The one ingredient in here is this golden olive burlap that I do have. I did get some burlap and dyed it yellow a while back, and I know I have it somewhere, but I'm just going to substitute some wool for that. The other exotic material here is peacock sword, but I think you can substitute regular peacock herl for that as well. However, here I would recommend you go for the fibers that are in the eye of the feather because they tend to be tougher. And I'm going to show another few little tricks along the way. Okay, so this is the recipe. And now let me get my document camera going as well. So I already have a hook in the vise. And speaking of tools and things, this is what Dave was talking about earlier. So a few things. If you haven't already done so, when you reach the end of the thread on a spool, keep the spool because these spools are very useful to do other things with them. In terms of bobbins, I think one of the absolute best bobbins ever made is this Tiemco ceramic tube bobbin. It comes with two sizes of thicker and thinner ceramic tubing at the head. They're butter smooth. They're very easy to adjust. They work beautifully with, standard uni thread bobbins. Perfect stuff. Anyway, so that's one tool. Another important tool, this one is really, really cheap, is a cup of water, because licking materials or spitting on them is not the ideal way of getting them wet. And there are many situations where you want things to get a little bit wet. It makes for handling of feathers a lot easier. The other thing is with the scissors, it's very comfortable and very efficient to tie scissors in hand. And these, in fact, are regular Shoppers Drug Mart type scissors from the cosmetics section. And the trick with them is to be not too long. So if you're buying scissors, 3.5 inches tends to be a good size for a not very large hand. 4 inches is gonna stick a little bit more out of my hand, so I prefer 3.5 inches. Regular fly tying scissors, that's true, they have bigger loops. For me, these loops are almost too big. So if you can try before you buy, so see these Drug Mart scissors are actually a better fit for my hand. Okay, so I'm gonna tie with them just to demonstrate that it's possible. And then of course you can go crazy with things like automatic bobbins, like this particular Norvise I have here. They have their uses too. So I'm just gonna use standard black thread and get going here, putting a little bit of thread on the base. Oh, and another vital tool, again, a cup of plastic or garbage somewhere on the desk. So all the stuff that you cut and you have little trimmings in your hand, the stuff that falls down, well, it falls down. There's nothing you can do about that other than vacuuming it every now and then. Having, though, a little garbage can handy is very helpful. Okay, so now I've got my thread into the bend of the hook, and I'm going to attach a tail. So what I want for a tail is a little bit of peacock sword, and I have some beautiful stuff here that's got quite a bit of blue in it. I like that. And I'm going to separate a few fibers here. You don't want too many fibers for the tail. The recipe very specifically calls for 4 fibers. So let's see, I think I did manage to count 4 here. I'm going to grab 4 fibers here. I'm just gonna cut them off. And you can see what I was talking about, unruly feathers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to moisten my fingertips on the other hand, and I'm going to get some of that water worked into my peacock sword here, as you can see, okay? So now I'm going to measure. So this is a bit of a long shank hook, so I'm going to go maybe about 1/3 shank length. Okay, so a couple of turns of thread here that will attach. And then what I'm using for the body is I found some wool that looks to me like the right color. It's a bit of a golden olivey hue. And again, wool, if it's got too many sticky fibers here, it can benefit from a little bit of moisture. But before I do the body, I need to do the rib. Now for the rib of this fly, what the recipe calls for is fibers from, again, from the eye of a peacock tail feather. And the reason for that is because these fibers tend to be tougher. The tips, the regular tips on peacock herl are extremely fragile. And so that stuff is not ideal. Now, this particular feather has got fairly fine pearls. So I'm just going to get a bundle of them. You kind of have to eyeball this. So in this case, I got 3 or 4 of them, as you can see here. And again, I want to make sure that I can attach these properly. So the tips are uneven. I'm just going to trim that. So there we go. I hold them here against the hook shank and go with a thread and secure them. Now I'm still very nervous about using peacock herl for a rib because it's a notoriously fragile material. So a little bit of cheating here helps. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take 1 strand only of crystal flash. And I'm taking pearl. So it's somewhat neutral. And attach it alongside here with the rest of the stuff. This is going to serve as a reinforcement for the ribbing. And now back to the wool body. So I'm going to attach now. I don't want to just have a very short stub of wool here because that's going to make a very fat back end of the fly. And I want my fly to have reasonable proportions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a little bit longer piece of wool so that it tapers nicely towards the front and it gives a little bit of extra thickness to the underbody. Okay, there we go. Move the thread forward. And now I'm just going to take the wool, separate the other stuff out of the way. This particular vise doesn't have a material clip on it, so I'm just going to have to pull things in the back there a bit. Just wrap it on the hook shank. Don't worry about the fuzziness. The burlap is even worse. Half the fibers end up in your hand with the burlap actually. Okay. So now coming to the end, things are kind of sticking to themselves a bit. A couple of turns to secure, and then a couple more turns in front to finish securing the wool. And then trim, and there's the body. Now I'm going to go for the ribbing. I'm just going to trim a little bit of the longest fibers sticking out here so that I don't get tangled when I try to put the ribbing on. So what I'm going to do for the ribbing is the following. I'm going to grab all the pearl fibers and that one strand of crystal flash, and I have a pair of here of rotating hackle pliers that are going to be very handy for what I'm about to do. So I grab all of these things together, put them between the jaws of the hackle plier like this, and then trim the extra length of crystal flash, which I'm not going to need. Okay. So now what I do is I take the hackle pliers and I twist this combination of herl and crystal flash. Okay. So I get a nice little rope here, which I'm going to use as the rib. Now, careful around the hook point. That's always a delicate moment. And spiral it up the body and keep twisting if this thing untwists on you. Okay. I got your rib. And when you come to the head of the fly, just secure. And then trim the extra. So that's the body. Now we need a little bit of a wing here. And for the wing, the recipe calls again for peacock sword. And notice here I have from the short end of the sword, I take fibers for the tail. From the longer end, I take fibers for the wing. So here I do something similar. I'll grab a small bunch of these, 4 or 5 fibers. And they usually, peacock sword is one of the worst things that I've had to deal with. It makes it an awful lot easier getting it wet before tying it on. So measure here, I want the peacock sword to reach about the end of the tip of the tail. No longer than that. And secure here and go back a little bit, about an eye length, to create some room here for the hackle, which is the last thing that's going to go on. Now the hackle comes from pheasant, And you can use either golden pheasant or regular ringneck pheasant or whatever other fancy pheasant you have. It's a question of what color do you want. So here is I have them already pre-soaking because this is going to be tied wet style. So here is a well-soaked feather. And I'm going to separate some fibers here so I can expose the tip. I'm going to tie this in by the tip. And so what I've done is I separated the tip of the feather and I folded the remaining fibers back. So there we go. Attach this close to where I left the gap. Notice that I didn't quite put my thread right in the gap between the fibers. I attached it just a little bit ahead of that. And now I'm going to move my thread forward towards the eye of the hook, fold back the fibers here in the tip of the feather and wrap over them. That will lock in that feather. It will not go anywhere. So now I just have to wrap this hackle. And while we're on the topic of fancy tools, I'm going to use fancy tools. This is an Italian-made pair of adjustable tension hackle pliers. This little nut here moves around and adjusts the tension on it. So I'm gonna, and these things will not slip out of this. You just have to be careful though not to overdo it with the tension. Okay, now with the wet feather that's been soaking for a bit, folding it shouldn't be too hard. So what I do is I maneuver the hackle pliers with my right hand and use my left hand to fold the fibers back. And then move this hackle forward. Okay. I stripped it so that I have the right amount available for hackling. Then here I just bring it around, or if I find that I end up with too much bare stem that's gonna go ugly and thick there, I just simply turn the hook in the vise a little bit. And here I have to be careful because normally I don't have a camera in front, but now I have the camera that's very close to the vise. So I have to go around there a little more carefully, otherwise would be necessary. So here's a couple of turns. Usually a couple of turns is all you're gonna need to secure your hackle. Right here, I'm gonna do one more turn just to be super safe. Notice I've already got some fibers here that are not quite where I want them, but I'll deal with that later. So first, slide the scissors down the stem, trim. That takes care of that. Now, if this one is pretty hopelessly out of line, so what I'm going to do with that guy is I'm going to search here for the tweezers. There's another great Sally Hansen's product, not just the head cement. There you go. Pluck that off. Move everything back into place. Fold them together here so that I don't end up trapping any more of the fibers. Build a little bit of a head right in that little gap between the hook shank and the eye, and then do a couple of whip finishes, and that ends the fly. There's whip finish number 1. And the other thing that I like to do before I do a whip finish is untwist the thread, because what that does, it gives you a neater, flatter looking whip finish head. So 4 or 5 turns of the whip finisher usually does the trick. And cut the thread. Okay, now this is normally not necessary, because after doing 2 whip finishes, this thing does not come undone. But still, to be on the safe side. And when you're doing flies, even something as big as this is a size 10 hook. It's a fairly small area, and it's easy to get the eye of the hook gummed up. So the solution to that problem is to take the brush that comes with your nail lacquer and trim it down to a fraction of what it is originally. And that will allow you to work around small areas like this without getting things gummed up. If you do end up getting things gummed up, well, then there's always a little bit of stuff left around to help you. Like you just tied this pheasant hackle on, and the stem makes a perfect cleaning device that's single use and then can go back in the garbage. Okay. And that's the TU special. And the recipe that I posted there, in fact, comes from Barry Phillips, who's an Edmonton fly tyer and fisherman, who I think worked for quite a number of years with Reg Denny, who was the originator of the fly, and gave us some of the classic Reg Denny recipes somewhere around about 10 years ago. And so what I posted there was a set of instructions on how to tie this fly from Barry Phillips rather than directly from Reg. But I think it's as good as the original, because my understanding is that Barry was tying a lot of Reg's flies for the shop. So he definitely knew what he was on about. And there it is. It's supposed to be a very good fly. I have tried it once or twice. I have yet to catch fish on it, but it's supposed to be good. And it was discussed as a super duper secret fly at the Tuesday meeting. And listening to the description, I was like, oh, wait a second, that's the TU special. There's no big secret about this. So here it is.
Looking fly.
Let us know how successful you are with it.
Nice looking fly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's got a nice, I mean, peacock always, works magic on flies.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the whole design of the fly and the color of the wool is excellent. It's a nice combination.
Oh, yes. And on the topic of cheap tools, here's another very important cheap tool that I use all the time. Whenever you get something shipped that comes with nice hard foam packaging, not styrofoam, the other stuff, don't throw it away, cut it into small pieces, and you can stage your hooks for tying on it. You can set the flies to dry after you've finished tying them, and so on and so forth. It's really handy. And here's a preview of what's going to happen next week.
Nice.
we're almost in April and August is not that far away. So